this is Alex for the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. For more videos like this, be sure to hit like and subscribe. And find our weekly Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts.
Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, welcome into another episode of the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. Guys, I am Derek, joined by your co-hosts Kevin and Alex. And we have a very special guest tonight. Very excited for this episode to be able to bring you. We've got Noah, the Fantasy Rookie Camp podcast.
That's right.
Noah, you and your co-coach Ian, how'd you guys get started? What started your idea to start the podcast and kind of gear yourself towards, some of the beginning stages of it, and then morph up to more experienced players?
Well, Ian and I, I met Ian long before I got into fantasy football. He and I were actually, we lived in the same city. We grew up in San Diego, and we are both music producers and DJs in the local scene. And that's how I met Ian. And for some reason, we just connected on Twitter about like fantasy. I think I tweeted something about fantasy football, and he was like, "Oh, you play fantasy football?" And every season, like for 3 seasons in a row, we would just text back and forth about fantasy football. And then we were like, we should just do a podcast because we're talking about fantasy football all the time. Like, why not? So we were thinking, like, what's the angle that we could go that other people aren't really doing? We were not even close to equipped to talk Dynasty. Like the guys who talk Dynasty are so much smarter than me. So it'll probably take a lot more research for me to get to that level. So I was like, well, why don't we just do one for beginners? My dad kept he got me into football when I was a kid. So I've been trying to get him into fantasy football because people who don't know, if you watch football and you don't play fantasy football, you don't know how much you can like football until you start playing fantasy, because it adds an entirely new dimension to enjoying the game of football, because you have a stake in every single thing that's happening on every game. So I was trying to get my dad into it, and he just couldn't keep up with all the podcasts. So I'm like, okay, that's our angle. Fantasy Rookie Camp. When the rookies come, they get drafted onto teams, they go to rookie mini camp, and they get the lowdown of how the NFL works. And that's what we want to do for newcomers to the fantasy sphere. We want to make it easy because, there's a lot of great podcasts out there, but they don't really gear their content towards the beginners. They aren't breaking things down, and that's what we wanted to do. So, and we're more than equipped to do that. Between me and Ian, we have years of experience playing fantasy football, and we both love it quite a bit.
So you guys have a couple of YouTube videos out there, and definitely was entertaining to watch that. And for those of you that haven't checked it out, you should hop over there and take a peek at it. They do what's called a hot sauce bet. Yep. And so really the question is, where did that idea come from? And how much did that hurt this year?
So the hot sauce bet came from, we were just trying to think of our version of, I guess, the fantasy footballer's water bet. And we didn't want to bet money because money is boring to bet on a podcast, and it doesn't really make for good content afterwards. And I'm sure you guys have watched the show Hot Ones on YouTube. You guys have seen that.
Yep.
So I got the idea, maybe we should just do, we should make a bet for every drop of hot sauce we have to eat, and at the end of the season, we tally them all up and eat them all at once. And let me tell you guys, that hot sauce is no joke. Have you guys ever tried Da Bomb hot sauce?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
You know,
it'll do a number on you.
Yeah, you do not want to eat as much as me and Ian eat every year, and it's a lot of fun because we get to record a podcast in searing pain and try to survive it. But it is the worst, and you don't feel good for the rest of the day. Your day is basically ruined. but it's still a lot of fun because we get to hit the hot sauce bet drop every time we make a bet during the show, and it's just kind of fun. So our pain for your amusement.
All right. So I guess kind of gearing in some insider information here. Who do you have as give me a bust and a sleeper for the 2020 season?
I know it's not really a sleeper, but I'm trying to get DJ Moore everywhere that I possibly can right now.
We
think
just talked about that.
I think that he's going to be among the top 3 wide receivers this year. I think he takes a huge step forward. Joe Brady coming in there. And I mean, there's some ambiguity with the quarterback situation, but I have a feeling they're going to get it figured out. And I mean, maybe it's misplaced optimism, but I really think that he's going to be he's not a sleeper, but definitely try to get him in all the drafts that you can. And as far as a bust goes, man, that one's going to be tough. I really think Joe Burrow isn't going to pan out as good as people think that he is. I think there's a lot of expectation for him going into the Bengals offense. And I think he's going to improve. I really like Joe Mixon this year. I don't see Joe Burrow coming in as the savior of the Bengals. I don't think that's...
I'm curious to get your thoughts after what we saw last year with the season that Christian McCaffrey had, and what you think will be the trajectory for him this year. We've discussed on this show before, having a season like that means that your expectations are through the roof, but do you see him even coming close to kind of the season that he had last year?
I mean, it's hard to imagine that he takes a massive step back. It seems like they are completely shaking up the offense, and maybe because he's already, when you're at number 1, you can't get any better than that, right? And I don't think that you can use him more than they used him last season. So, I mean, it's not to say that I think he's going to be horrible. I'm still going to take him in the top 3, but it's so hard to repeat seasons like that. I mean, you gotta build regression back into, your projections every year. So, I mean, it's hard to say. If there was anybody to overtake him, I think it would be Saquon. I think if with the trajectory of that offense, and the way it's looking right now, it looks like they're poised to make a big offensive push with these coaching hires. I mean, depending on who they get in at quarterback, but even with Kyle Allen, they were still Christian McCaffrey was still tearing it up. So, I mean, I think he's a pretty locked in, solid asset for next season.
So shifting gears a little bit and talking more about the fantasy rookie camp there. What are you guys working on any new projects this off season? Anything that the listeners should be aware of coming down the pike from y'all?
In the off season, we take a step back from talking about fantasy so much, and we talk about the game of football as without the fantasy aspect to it. So we shift gears to basically explaining fantasy football to the absolute beginner, somebody who doesn't know anything about football. If you don't know what a left tackle is, those are your episodes. You want to go watch those episodes because we break down every single position on the offense, defense, what a touchdown means, what a first down is. So we in the off season leading up to the to draft season in August, that's what we focus on doing. So yeah, we'll be ramping that up here shortly, probably in March, leading up to the NFL draft. You got to put in the effort into fantasy football in order for it to be fun. If you don't put in the effort, it's not really fun, So it also really sucks when you lose, in fantasy after putting in so much effort. But I think that's part of the fun too. Is you put in all this effort and you're like, all right, I crafted the perfect team, and then you just let it loose, So anyway.
Absolutely.
And then watch Matt Flynn rip a Super Bowl from you.
Alex, I see you're still bitter about that.
What was that, 10 years ago?
Yeah, you're welcome. Noah, where can our listeners find out more about you online?
Well, you can follow us on Twitter at Fantasy Rookies, on Instagram at Fantasy Rookie Camp, and you can also subscribe to our podcast. You just search Fantasy Rookie Camp. We will be there. Ian and I, we usually post once every 2 weeks in the off season. Like we take a couple months off after the season ends, so expect more content from us in March. But yeah, on Twitter, Instagram, and the podcast app as of right now. And if you'd like to go watch us writhe in pain for 2 years in a row, you can go check out our YouTube page as well.